Children's literature represents one of the largest publishing markets, yet children are not always hearing their stories. Children don't know or can't always access words that relate to their individual identities. Think about the spaces and places where literature lives. Bookstores, which are dwindling and becoming larger and less independent. Libraries, whose funding is being slashed all over the country. Department stores, who stock only what sells, and what sells is what is popular or classic. And classrooms, where choices are contingent on the curriculum and the stories the individual teacher knows. And since 76% of teachers are white and from middle-class backgrounds, these stories may not be inclusive. Diversity in children's literature is critical in constructing culture and community identity. We grow up and are conditioned and ultimately wired and rewired by the stories we read, hear, and retell as children. The gatekeeping of children's books that happens in publishing houses, in schools, in libraries, at home, often prevents new stories, different stories, rewritten stories from being consumed, read, taught, and valued as quality literature. By rethinking the characters we write and read in children's and young adult literature, we can shift the stigma associated with having a disability. Children read to learn, to escape, and to identify. Children look to books to find characters like them as well as different from them. Having access to books about individuals with disabilities is not only good for children with disabilities, it's good for every child because it can help us understand all of the characters in our classroom and in our community and in our world. The 2016 Disabilities Statistics Annual Report shows that the rate for children living with a disability ages 0 to 17 is now 7.2% of the total population percentage of disabled individuals. Yet, according to Disability Scoop, out of the last 131 top literary Newbery Medal and Honor Awards given for children's books, only 31 from 1975 to 2009 included a main or supporting character with a disability. And researcher Blaska found that only 10 of 500 award-winning children's novels published between 1987 and 1991 had a disabled character. Ironically, even the leading institutions in the children's literature field rarely or do not at all fund studies, feature, or host discussions surrounding the lack of disability representation. Disability is too often not recognized as part of the diversity culture. According to Patricia Dunn, who identifies as having a disability and is an English teacher, this narrative of disability is an important one because it's not common. So this topic of representation of disability in children's and young adult literature is forgotten and often not even recognized as worthy. Why aren't writers building mirrors where individuals with disabilities can reflect on their own lives and values? Are they building windows through which readers can see their own biases as well as a panorama of human perspectives? With the success of the middle-level children's book Wonder by R.J. Palacio, and of course the movie, I am hopeful that more publishers will commit to serving this topic and will take notice. However, I must offer a caveat because as much as Wonder has helped start a conversation, there is concern and controversy in the disability studies community over how representation was written in that popular novel and related in the movie. We have to ask, do these children's and young adult literature books catalyze charity sentiment and continue marginalization? Do they cultivate better understandings of disability? In this Ball State University immersive grant-sponsored course, Rethinking Disability Representation in Children's and YA Lit, I opened the gate to students interested in learning more about disability representation. We read, researched, and examined the role children's and young adult literature play in young people's lives. We examined both quality texts that sought to reduce the stigma and promote understanding, and also some examples of classic children's literature that unfortunately added to the hegemony surrounding the societal stigma of being disabled. Partnering with Rhonda Cunningham at Burris Laboratory Schools and her students living in the greater Muncie community, we read texts together and then we wrote to those stories, allowing Burris students to explore and define disability inclusion in our library of books. Additionally, we partnered with teacher Carolyn Portuchek and her Brook School elementary students in Fishers, Indiana, who created a series of videos asking for more inclusive books. The course and the project's most critical goal was to include marginalized voices and publish stories about inclusive topics not being published, shelved, read, taught, or even recognized in children's literature. Our final project is a free, comprehensive website, Rethinking Kids Lit, Disability Representation Matters. That site includes featured book trailers, book reviews, and lesson plan information for contemporary, recommended children's YA lit with positive representation of characters with disabilities. Critiques of contemporary books who include characters with problematic representations of disability. A list of comprehensive resources for parents and librarians to use when presenting or discussing these books. A featured leading children's young adult writer, Cindy Baldwin, who talks with us about the books disabled readers deserve. A Kids Can section where readers can hear directly from young people asking for more inclusive books. A call to writers to help fill the gap in composing additional stories that include characters with disabilities. And finally, a free, downloadable literary magazine of new children's and YA stories written by Ball State students that fill the gap of missing stories of disability representation. This website design includes dyslexic font, audio, video, illustration, and text to make it more fully accessible. We had hoped to also include sign language, but unfortunately our budget did not allow that. But we remain hopeful that it can be added in the future. We want to ensure kids with disabilities that there are stories being written about them, about their lives. And where there are no stories, publishers and writers, we need to write those stories. Some history behind how this website and project came into fruition can be found in an essay titled Opening the Gates I wrote in 2015 for journal Reading Today, now called Literacy Today. In 2013, I was awarded the student-nominated University-wide Excellence in Teaching Award at Ball State University. And with that award came the opportunity to redesign or design a dream course at my university, Ball State. As a teacher, a writer, and an activist, the choice for me was clear. Transform the course Children's Literature, a required course for elementary ed and young adult literature for secondary English education majors, into a course titled Rethinking Children's Literature. The course redesign at that time was driven by my then 24 years of teaching experience and research and work. My discovery has been that children are not hearing their stories. Stories about children like them, about families like theirs, about experiences they have, about lives they actually live. Children, teachers, parents, even librarians don't always know or can't find or don't have access to children's works that relate to these diverse identities. Therefore, the opportunity to construct, reconstruct, or create a better community is not there. The majority of my undergraduate English students at Ball State University are white and are female and do come from working middle-class families, many first-time university attendees, and from rural communities in the Midwest. My goal was to open the gate to them, to get them to rethink children's literature, and then invite them to read and write for change. And they did. In the words of a once resistant student in the course, it's not about me. It's not about my personal values, but about the social values of my students who live and study in this world and the responsibility I have as a teacher to my students. And it was critical to me that they not only rethink, but also share their thinking out with a more global community of educators, readers, and librarians. The rest of that essay goes on to explain the partnership I created in 2013 and 14 with George and Francis Ball Distinguished Professor Dr. Jennifer Pavlonis media student team with my education students to build a digital magazine through a free app, Rethinking Children's and YA Lit, Read for Change. We created 3 editions of that magazine. The last edition, from the fall of 2016, Rethinking Black Children's and Young Adult Literature, included over 350 pages of book trailer videos, resources, gorgeous artwork created by Ball State University student artists, and most importantly, resources and newly composed stories to fill the gap represented in what is not being published. The magazine had a very successful social media following and downloads from all over the country. In fact, one of the books published by a student in one of the editions was picked up by a print publisher and placed into print publication. So the intent, the message about rethinking children's literature has been heard. Because of changes in technology access and funding, we now have to transition that magazine to a more comprehensive website with a free downloadable PDF that will include those new stories. Because the magazine has a following of readers, we hope they will continue to follow us on our new website in continuing the important work of rethinking children's and young adult literature. Before I close this editor's note, I want to urge publishers. Please seek out, include, and publish positive representations of stories with children with disabilities. In an article titled Narrative Erasure as Disability Normalization in Children's Picture Books, authors Aho and Alter warn us that the promotion, circulation, and reception of children's picture books remains strongly embedded in an ableist framework that manifests in special language use, inclusion discourses, and overcoming narratives. They clarified that presses and authors are among the first to shape and reproduce a hermeneutical framework for children's picture books, which are in turn adapted and circulated by reviewers, bloggers, and other online reader comments, as well as librarians, teachers, and university instructors in education programs. The children's and YA lit field does need more books that include characters with disability, but it does not need overly didactic damsels in distress or defenders. Parents, teachers, and librarians demand fully diverse and inclusive texts to fill library, classroom, and home shelves, and feature these books not just during Disability Awareness Month, but every month as a welcome story to read.